Hello, everyone. Today I had the privilege of speaking with local businessman John Rogers, who is seeking election to the Houston County Commission chairman seat here in Houston County in Southeast Alabama. Anyway, because he's the challenger trying to unseat the incumbent, we were able to explore a little bit about his biographical story, what experiences of life had led him up to wanting to seek this office, and how he would differentiate himself from the incumbent, who is, that's County Commission Chairman Brandon Shoupe, who I had a pleasure of speaking with a couple weeks ago. Anyway, in my conversation with John Rogers, we talked a little bit about what his leadership philosophy might be, how faith drives us to this type of local interaction and activism, wanting to make our world a better place, the wisdom it takes to try to make correct decisions, and what are some of the different decisions he might have made if he were to win election and serve in the same office. Anyway, it was a wonderful conversation. I hope you'll join us for this journey. So I will start recording from here if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Is that okay?
That's great. Yeah.
I'm the one audio-visual person. I've had to learn all sorts of skills in my desire to talk with people in the community that I never knew before. Wow. I mean, I just my career before I became a priest, just before Holy Week last year, was I had been an archaeologist for many years.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the career I'd chosen. And then through a series of events, I realized, it's time. But I had been a deacon volunteering myself for the church for 14 of those.
Wow.
And so for many, many years, people kept on asking me as a deacon, when are you going to become a priest? I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Are you kidding? And
wow.
Eventually he quit.
Amen.
Eventually I lost that fight. And
yeah.
So,
well, there's a divine will upon your life for sure.
Right.
And you answered the call. And that's first and foremost. So that's the blessing in that.
Well, that's the thing but it's one of those things where you go, okay, how much blame do I want to give God for having, shanghaied me into this process? Sure. But nevertheless, having come here, all of a sudden that career change all of a sudden required a bunch of new skills that I never had before. And one of which was I never had interviewed people. I never had taken the chance to, to do any of this audiovisual things or whatever.
Sure.
And so the YouTube presence we have for the church is all brand new to me. So there's been quite a learning curve in trying to reach out and having these conversations with the community.
Well, I think I'm wearing your shoes then. I'm in that same position, Father, as far as being interviewed. This is new to me because obviously it's the first time I've ever committed to running for public office. So I've felt like I've been getting stronger and stronger through the Holy Spirit, first and foremost.
Okay.
Because naturally, I feel really gifted as far as a strong communicator and coming from the heart.
Okay.
I'm a passionate speaker.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel a little more comfortable in the one-on-ones. It gets tough when there's a lot of people in the room for me.
All right.
And so that's, this debate that we've got coming up on May 19th at the forum for voters to really, see these candidates. That's going to be a little bit tougher environment, but I'm just praying, most importantly, that the Lord and the Holy Spirit just come to me so that I'm just not nervous.
Right.
Because sometimes, nerves can kind of turn into a little bit of anxiety and
of course
fear and worry when you look at it in the spiritual realm.
Right.
And those three things just always been, to me are just can be like a big time negative, as far as just having an impact on the spirit, because I feel like when you're not nourished up in the spirit, that flesh can get really weak, and it's tough, And
well, I think there's a healthy sense of never losing that, because for me, I mean, I've been preaching. I began as a circuit preacher back in the '90s, going through different log cabin churches up in the Northern California when I was going through Bible college. And so you go, okay, I've been preaching for that amount of time. Have you ever lost your jitters? Never. I have this recurring nightmare of actually showing up in heaven, and there's Jesus going, "Hey, good to be here. Glad you're here." However, I was listening to your tape the other day, and I'm wondering where you got that. I'm like, I don't want to have that conversation with the Son of God, right? Where he's like, "Where did you get that, by the way? That sounded like you're pulling it out of some other orifice." And I'm like, whoa. I had the best of intentions, but people were, People were listening to the pulpit and they were taking it seriously. I don't want. So that's the kind of a fear you don't. It's healthy not to lose in a sense.
No, I agree.
And so, especially, and there's a sense in which, especially when you're put in a position of trust, in seeking elected office to manage things and be seen as something of a community leader, and secular leader. What does that even mean anyway? I mean, because sacramentally we know that the line between the sacred and the secular is really weird.
Sure.
Yeah, and so
it's very, very weird, but very, very complicated.
It is really, mind. It's really fuzzy, and so
it really is.
Right.
It really is.
And so as a result, there's an extent to which people seeking elected office, it's good that they come under some sort of level of spiritual scrutiny too.
Amen. Well, I think church and state, that's another one that's been complicated when I've thought about it. And now that I'm in public office, trying to make that decision on what that looks like. And for me, I think my foundation is my faith.
Okay.
And I think that the only reason I've committed to public office was because of my faith and feeling like the Spirit was tugging on me.
Okay.
At times I felt like the flesh was getting involved and trying to pull me away. Obviously, I've been married to a beautiful woman that we've been married for 16 years. Mm-hmm. We have a beautiful family. And she's kind of my rock as far as I go to, when I feel like I'm lost. And that was a tough conversation between me and her as far as making that commitment. But ultimately, she stood beside me because she felt like, well, listen, if the Spirit's calling, then you answer. And there were some other reasons that I answered as well, as far as actually becoming a candidate for this commission chairman position in Houston County.
Okay.
And so,
I mean, I don't want to interrupt you too much, but every now and then you say something, I'm like, okay, I hope I don't forget to ask about that. Sure. Like when you say the Spirit calling you to elected office, what does that mean? Because there's a sense. I've been teaching for the University of Houston online classes for 13 years. And one of the biggest ways in which I oftentimes grade the students most harshly, the class I have taught is the Bible and Modern Science.
Okay.
And so oftentimes I'll get them on, formatting and typos and different things, whether their content is, correct and whether they do good writing. But the thing I oftentimes grade them the harshest, if they're coming from a Christian background, is I'll be, I don't scribble on their page because it's all electronic, but I'm kind of in constant comment saying too much insider jargon that no one else could understand from an outsider perspective. And I'll tell them, I'll say, because here they are trying to learn this dialogue, Bible, science, religion, some of the insider-outsider dynamic. Right. And I'll tell them, and my comments are, the conversation is not advanced through a lot of insider language. And so I'll force them to say, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? It drives them nuts. But I believe that the church having a voice to the world means that we try to really define what we mean when we say, what does it mean by called of God to elected office? In such a manner that it seems to leave personal ambitions completely out of it.
I would think that personal ambition can be defined for me as, my mother, when I was with my mother as a child, she loved politics. But, I always had a hard time of defining politics for myself. But over 46 years of being Earth now as a mature adult, I guess I've got my own definition of politics. Okay. But when we align back to personal ambition, I think there was a little personal ambition to commit to public office as a candidate for two reasons. One is because my public servant heart that I've naturally been gifted with, I feel, as a Christian, as a child of God, first and foremost. And then secondly would be the experiences that I've seen with my mother and her love for politics, especially as a Republican.
Okay.
Right. Look at it as a Republican, Democrat, independent.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So as a Republican, and then how heavily involved she was with assisting other Republicans or candidates in our local community here in Houston County, and helping them with their campaigns. Okay. So she was out campaigning for these candidates. I was real young, and then she would actually have a campaign,
right.
Party, in a sense, to bring people from the community
right.
to, in a sense, help and support these candidates' campaigns.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of judges she helped. So she was always heavily involved. So, there's a little bit of foundation there and a little bit of ambition of saying, well, maybe I am kind of saying, I wonder how well I would do in public office, because then you bring in, well, who is John Rogers?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was a very, very gifted athlete.
Now, I want to preface that I don't think all ambitions are negative. I just think that it's like when someone says, well, that's pride. It's pride. Well, yes, it can be a negative, but I'm also proud of my children. It's like, so it's how it's used, right?
But
so
let me ask you a
ambitions to
question.
be well-pleasing is a good thing, too. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, let me ask you a question, Father. As far as when we talk about personal ambition, would you align that with a little more not spiritual ambition and more of something for personal gain, or more
it requires a conversation?
Do you think? Yeah, because that could get complicated.
No, it requires a conversation. I think it is, because personal ambition just by itself sounds like, oh my gosh, sounds impious, right?
Sure.
But all the apostles are just rabidly ambitious to hear of their Father, well done, good and faithful servant. So and I used to say this, like, every son wants to hear that of his dad, like, good job. Amen. I think that any Christian wants to hear that of their Heavenly Father in real time.
Amen.
And so I think there's a very positive sense in which someone, like, for example, everything you told about your mom.
Sure.
If you had said, it's hard to define, but I tell you what, there's a sense in which I think it makes my mom proud to see me active in this way. I'd have just stamped that legit, right?
Right, yeah.
Because there have been times in my life where I'm like, I can't tell you well, but I can tell you right now, my dad would be pleased about it.
Right.
And somewhere in some manner in which some psychologists will have a fun time with, that's satisfying enough for me.
Sure.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to ask you about that.
You're good.
But you were calling to, those things that you're describing, those things that we kind of compress into that word calling, that gets thrown. It's kind of jargon, but it needs to be unpacked.
Well, you got to understand, a lot of people that may not be Christians and or are Christians, some can answer that for themselves as far as their faith.
Right.
We know faith is mysterious.
Right.
And so I have a conversation with my clients with the service I provide and the business I provide here in the community, which I've been doing for about 17, 18 years now.
Related to court?
To court system.
Okay.
That's right, related to the criminal justice field. And we have a real personal conversation about faith. And I had two different people in my office today. And I really think that it was no doubt two divine appointments where I was called upon. And to be honest with you, I've had a day that was really busy day. A lot on my mind. This was on my mind too. This was on my heart because I'm thinking, hey, I've got to go and, find the church and meet with Father Aaron, and we're going to do this sit down, and we're going to have a discussion on this podcast about me as a candidate and other things,
Right.
And so I've had, a lot on my mind.
Right.
So at times today, I feel like I got my cross in my pocket here, and I probably hadn't held on to it enough today and said, you know what, Lord, give me the strength to come back to the Spirit, and may your will be done upon my life today, right now, because the biggest gift we have is in the present, and that's why we call it the present, because it's a present, it's a gift. And so when those people come in for those, I call it now two divine appointments. One was actually somebody that I knew since I was probably 16 years old. And he's going through a lot, and I noticed he was born June of 1980, and I was born January of 1980.
Okay. And
my son was in the office with us. So he said hello to Brexton. I said, Brexton, say hello to, I call him Dre. And that his middle name, I think, is Drayton, but they call him Dre.
Okay.
And his first name's Harvey. So I call him by, and he said, John, you're the only one that's going to call me by Dre. I said, well, I know you by Dre. That's who you are. And he said, I know. And Father, he's going through a lot, and when he was with me, I could just tell something was heavy on him. And he says, John, I just want to tell you something. I'm so proud of you, because I know where you come from and what you had to overcome to get to where you're at, And so I have a lot of spiritual things. I have a lot of crosses in my office. I'm Catholic. That's my Christian faith that I practice as a Catholic. It's Catholicism. And so he went on to tell me that he was really impacted with the loss of his brother, who I knew was Billy, and he started crying. And he said he felt like that the Lord is calling on him to make some changes in his life, in his lifestyle. And he told me that he had a dream, and that he dreamed that his brother was right next to Jesus, and he's seen it in the dream.
Interesting.
And it said he touched him. He started crying, and I knew then it was like, okay, like the Lord's calling on me right now. And there has been times where I feel like the flesh kind of intervenes. It's like, you're just too busy. You got to get him out of here. And I knew, I really felt like I was being called upon and being very much tested by my Heavenly Father, saying, this is why I created you for this moment, this divine moment, to step up right now and to listen and be genuine.
Right.
And I did. And he opened up. And I tell you what, my spirit was on fire after meeting with him. It really was. We said a prayer together. I did my share of crying because of my brokenness, because he says, John, I've just been struggling. I said, but we all struggle, right? I said, we're humans. I said, every day's a struggle. We're in the flesh. It will never change. The great thing is that we can overcome the struggle when we make a commitment, one, to ourselves, and two, to our Father in heaven, and a relationship, in that personal relationship. So that was a divine appointment that I had today, and I felt really good about saying, you know what, Lord, I did my job. You called upon me, I did, and then had another one that came in. Her name was Amelia, and she just broke down, Father, from the start. I'm thinking, Lord, and she was after Dre. And after Dre, I just had a prayer with him, so my spirit's on fire, and it stayed on fire for her. Because I wanted to lift her up. Right. And she talked about her childhood. And I told her a little bit about mine, which I've got a lot of brokenness in my childhood. Right. And I told her, but I said, it defines who we are today. And I know it's tough. And I told her, like somebody told me once before, in life sometimes in a very mysterious way, we can kind of, past events can come upon us, especially when you live in a healthy lifestyle and you've given your life to the Lord and you pray, your spirit's nourished up. You'll say, well, 25 years ago, you did this. You ought to be ashamed. And it feels like this inner flesh or maybe the darkness in the world, the evil one trying to attack us, right? And then you come down like, oh, wow, I am ashamed of that. But my friend told me, and it was a lot to it. He says, John, when those moments occur in life, you have to forgive yourself and move on in that moment, in order to get through. And it makes a lot of sense. So I told her the same thing. And I said, if there's things in your past that you're ashamed of, first and foremost, you've been forgiven through the covenant blood of Jesus. But secondly, sometimes you just have to forgive yourself to move on. Right. So it doesn't steal your joy and bring you down. So
church fathers have discussed what they described as the sin of despair. And that is the succumbing to those negative, those prophetic, those negative messages that can be our own psychological baggage. It can be some, some influence from the evil forces that seeks to overcome all of the hope that the Christian ought to have. And so the sin of despair is the choice to basically discard all of what is promised to us in Christ and think only on the negative, which can be debilitating, be paralyzing, and render one useless to the cause of Christ. And so there's a sense of it. I mean, psychologists will unpack that in many ways, but nevertheless, the church has often always had a response to that. Like, no. There's a healthy balance of being self-aware and being self-defeating in that sense. And memory oftentimes helps with that. It causes that in many ways. So we have to kind of learn the lesson, move on, and take stock in every way in which God providentially has moved us along. Amen. So sorry to derail us early on. I actually wanted to start, if I could, something a little bit biographical, because I wanted to hopefully progress toward what in life had kind of brought you to this space to now. And I mean, And because not because your career, not only your career right now as it relates to the justice system and what you're doing now, but then inspires you to say, I want to seek your office, but not just seek this office, but seek this office in such a manner that because when there's an incumbent, there's two reasons why a person would want to unseat the incumbent or fire them for after a fashion. One, you disagree with their
policies,
policy, philosophy, outlook, and so forth, or you agree with their policy, outlook, and so forth, but believe that you could be more effective at the same job. So
valid points there.
And so in that reason, we kind of want to get to there. That's kind of like where we're at. But I'm hoping that you'll walk us up to that point, starting with kind of like early influences and how life has kind of brought you to this space. I'll try not to interrupt you as much.
No, and Father, I think you hit on two valid reasons why both those reasons you talked about, I think were two reasons why I wanted to run. Those are two valid reasons for sure.
Okay.
One, I do disagree with some of his policies, and I think that overall leadership is first and foremost in that chairman position.
Okay.
And I think it's got to be genuine, real leadership from the heart, and it's got to be transparent. It's got to be genuine, and I just think that really has to be defined.
Okay.
As far as real, genuine leadership and what that really looks like.
Okay.
So that's one of the things. And then I really feel like, yes, in the private sector with the success I've had, I really feel like I could be so very much more efficient and effective by the experience and the attributes and the qualities that I have and that I've gained in the private sector with the success that I've had. I can apply it to government to be successful. But most importantly, with a public servant heart that we discussed, okay, and ensuring that who has the biggest impact on the leadership and the decisions that we make as a team, as a commission, because, I can only promote things. I can't promise anything. As a chairman, you're just promoting to the commission. They have to vote on it. Ultimately, yes, I can break a tie, but ultimately the commission votes on it. So we want to ensure that those decisions are what's best for the majority of our citizens around the county, that we're genuine in ensuring that anything and everything that we have to do with policies and procedures that's going to have an impact on our citizens is what's best for our citizens as a whole. And surely the decisions that are made is for the long term. And ultimately, the success I had, a lot of the success I've had in private sector, and going back to a little bit of biography about myself, I've been in business for 17 years with judicial case management. We have 8 municipal contracts here in the Wiregrass where we serve the courts and the defendants that come through the courts.
What judicial case management? What does that entail? What does that?
Well, it can almost be in some instances like private probation, but also there's case management aspects to it where we do a lot of pretrial diversions, deferred prosecutions. Where, in a sense, a judge puts in a sentence, and what we do is we want to help manage that defendant and give them all the resources to be successful in sentence completion.
Interesting. Okay.
And whatever that is, it's almost and Father, at times, we almost feel like we hold their hands.
Are you subcontracted by their attorney?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we have a contract with these smaller, and they're mostly, the majority are smaller municipal courts that just don't have the resources.
I see.
It's tough on a clerk of court, the court clerks.
Okay.
With all the administrative responsibilities that they have to manage these defendants, to go over and beyond to help these defendants with sentence completion. So that's what we do as a court case manager. We come in and we increase completion. And we want to help these people to where we decrease the amounts of warrants that are issued for defendants, right? And the amount of people that's going to get a suspended driver's license due to the consequences of them not complying.
I see. Okay.
So we want to increase it. And we just do it in a very humble way, and a sense of humility, a sense of caring, counseling, mentoring. I've added all that to this equation, to this formula, for an equation to be successful. And I really just think it's really divine calling. I just think that this is where the Lord wanted me to be. For whatever reason, I was going to become an accountant, and the numbers thing, and just didn't enjoy it. Then I transferred, and I was like, well, what am I going to do now? Maybe I'll become an attorney, so I went criminal justice.
You might have too much personality to be an accountant.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that's a joke specifically designed to get me in trouble with my wife.
Yeah.
Who's a very gifted accountant herself, but I have to throw that in there just so she can kind of like give me the side eye later on going, what in the world are you talking about?
You're sleeping on the couch.
I know. Please, sorry, please. So this, incredibly fulfilling. And how long have you been doing that?
About 17 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here, all the while here in Dothan, or
yeah, on my own here in Dothan. I serve Andalusia and a lot of smaller municipalities here in the Wiregrass, Ashford and Taylor and Webb, Pinkard, and a lot of other smaller municipalities.
Okay.
And they're small, but before that, I had gotten on with a large private probation company when I graduated college. So that's how it all began. That's when the foundation really created itself. And I decided, I said, well, instead of going another 3 years and going to law school, maybe I'll just see what's out there to offer, because I was a little bored.
Okay.
And so that was my first interview, was for a probation officer position with Enterprise Municipal Court. And that was the first position I took. And that's where it all started and the experience started. And then I've also been very successful at managing Woods property. That's a large, the Charles Woods building downtown.
Okay.
They call it the Historic Houston Hotel. I also managed that building, been managed that building for the Woods family for about 12 years.
It's one of the beautiful structures in town. And I lament that at some point it will be replaced by something that looks like everything else. I'm sorry. I'm very much I'm very, very critical of modern architecture and how it seems like they all, no matter how many stories you put on it or how big the building is, they all look like McDonald's, and all of them. And so, so those historic structures downtown, I really hope that they see some use and really are able to maintain some life to them.
I think they are. I think the city of Dothan's done a great job as far as the historic aspect of trying to keep these buildings historic. And so I think they've got some stringent procedures when it comes to making any changes to some of these historic buildings.
Right.
So I can tell you that. And so hopefully that gives you a little sense of,
I know.
I'm always trying to keep that.
I'm always looking for evidence that my cynicism is misplaced. And so,
yeah.
So please, so that's a very fascinating career. That's something I hadn't thought about, in terms of the aspect of the criminal justice system. But then how earlier you talked about challenges that you've had to overcome, and I don't want to gloss over those, and because they're part of your story, and I want to make sure that you had an opportunity to kind of share as much as you're comfortable about that.
Yeah, and I would say, there's a little bit in my childhood, and my mother and my father, that I call Dad, they divorced, I believe, I was probably about 9 or 10.
Okay.
But before then, even in the marriage that they were in, I really didn't see a lot of them together because my dad was always on open road.
Okay.
And so when they divorced, and even along with him being out on the open road, the only opportunities when I really spent some time with him was whenever summer vacation, we'd get in the truck with him for about a month and ride. And that was one of the best memories I remember, was getting in the big 18-wheeler. And we would go with him and stay back there in the bunk, and he would always get the atlas out and say, hey, where do you want to go? And we you got 3 different spots. You want to go to New York, you want to go to Wyoming. And it was awesome, because I was like, what, it didn't matter to me. As long as I was in the truck with him, it was awesome. So those were childhood memories that were created that were very valuable with him. And, but once they got a divorce, it was really, really, really traumatic for me.
Right.
And so as a gifted athlete, I was playing a lot of youth sports, and, my mother at that point in time was a single mother. I mean,
what was your sport?
Basketball and football. I played a lot of basketball and football.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go
Not
ahead.
big on baseball.
Right,
but I was most talented in basketball. A lot of people tell you, if you run to the right people, they say, hey, that guy could play.
Okay.
So I was really gifted in basketball. And a lot of people say, he can jump out the gym. And so I do all kinds of stuff. This is before all the social media. I still got some pictures. Still got a little bit of me dunking at 37, two-handed, pretty good.
Okay.
So yes, I was really, really gifted in that. I had a scholarship to play college ball. Made some bad decisions with that once I went. And I think a lot of that was because once they divorced, like I said, I really didn't have a father figure.
Right.
And I really, I don't want to sound critical of a mom and dad at the time, but there was a lot of times when you're a child, I think children are so fragile. I really do, all of them. And I think children can be really insecure when they're missing love. And my wife always touches on, my wife comes from an amazing family, 4 siblings, her mom and dad, they were together for 31 years. And I always tell her, I said, you come from a foundation of a lot of love. And I don't want to be critical of my mother, and I love her to death, and she knows that.
Right.
And she done the best that she could under the circumstances,
right.
and with her weaknesses and struggles as a mother and as a woman, just like we all have, Father. We all have them. So when I look back and my wife tells me, she always tells me, she says, honey, it doesn't cost a penny to love, and
right.
So when it goes back to where I'm going with it,
I
really felt at times a lot of my pain and a lot of my hurt was because of my childhood. I didn't really feel a sense of a lot of love.
Right.
I didn't have a father figure or anybody just grabbing me and holding me and saying, I love you.
Right.
You're great at this, giving me wisdom, just a real support system.
I see.
My mother was always working. I mean, at one time, Father, she was almost working 24 hours a day. She was working she would sit with elderly people. And I remember she sat with Miss Wyndham for about 4 years, where it was almost 24 hours. So she'd be at the nursing home, but sometimes she would bring her home.
I see.
And Miss Wyndham would be in the rocking chair. Now, those were life lessons, though, that were very valuable to me, to watch my mother have a heart to take care of the elderly. Because you got to have a good heart. And she was very passionate about that. And she made a great living with that passion.
Right.
And I know it also corresponded with good money for her to take care of her kids.
Right.
But at times, I felt like my mother, instead of holding me and grabbing me and saying, you know what, I love you.
Right.
It was just like, how much money do you need? She was always going to try to take care of us financially. So when I turned 16, I got this nice, beautiful car. Most 6-year-olds didn't have it. But she felt like, because she wasn't there, it was like it was a form of material to replace a little bit of that love, that nurturing, that love that we needed more, and not having a father figure. So I was missing a lot of that.
When you're kind of put into survival mode a lot, then a lot of the loving transactions that we do are monetized. They are reduced to the commodities that are handling the basics, in a sense. Because I know people that come from, say, poverty culture, where it's like, they're only thinking about, they're still thinking about the basics all the time. And you're like, what's this cost? What's that money? Where's the next meal? Things like that. Sure. Even though they're in a position now where they don't have to think about that all the time, they're still trained that way. And so I could see where that might be the case, where it's like, if things are really difficult, it stays, those acts or those expressions of love are all kind of commoditized in terms of what am I, what's the tangible thing I'm offering.
Yep. And so going back to the root of that question and some of that pain in my childhood, there was a lot of that. And then, I think I had a struggle in knowing what love really looked like as I started to mature. Yeah. And even once I married my wife at 29, I struggled big time. And I say that I know for a fact my wife was in that closet on her knees praying for me as a spouse. Okay. Because she finally figured out. She said something's wrong here, with my husband. And obviously we had a conversation about it. And then she started adding it all up. And then it gets a little bit deeper, because then the one that I call my dad that I thought was my biological father, then the chatter started about, hey, that's not your biological father. And I had another brother that said, I know who your biological father is. And then that can of worms opened up. And then, and so then, you're just doing your best to trying to manage that in your life. So you're thinking, well, wow, Yeah. So but then you get to where I'm at today, even though I still there's still a question mark on who that may be as far as my biological father.
Right,
And it's a
right.
tough conversation for my mother to have with me.
Right, right.
And I'll be honest with you. And it makes it even tougher on me with her responses, you know. But I feel like for me, I've had to answer that for myself and saying, well, I know who my Father in heaven is.
Right.
You know, and he's got me, and we know what the scripture says that, you know, even if my mother was to forsake me, who carried me in her womb,
Right.
the Father in heaven never will. And so those are tough things. And, you know, as human beings, for all of us here on earth, you know, we all have a story. And some of that's a little bit of my testimony
Right.
as far as my childhood. And that really sometimes can have a negative impact on my life. And sometimes I can see it flare up in the way that I interact with my own children.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah. And so my wife's just like, oh my gosh, John, you got really upset. And I'm really kind of like, oh wow, I've got to pull back and say, Lord, forgive me for that action, because I don't want to become, in a sense, a product of kind of that environment
Right.
of not having that love. So I feel like through my faith that the more that I can love my children
Right.
sincerely.
Gary Smalley and Gary Smalley and John Trent years ago, this is maybe back in the 90s, had wrote a pretty good book. It was, you know, in the Christian counseling genre, called The Gift of the Blessing. And they were deriving their inspiration. I mean, they're Christian psychologists, but they were driving a lot of their inspiration and their advice from this story of Genesis, where the blessing is passed on from father to son. Where the blessing goes from, you know, Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and so forth. Who's going to get the blessing, and how am I to lay my hands on them? And this idea of the blessing that gets passed on has something to do with how that child's going to go. Wow. Well, the scriptures really just give us two categories, really: blessings and curses.
Well, I was going to say generational curses.
Exactly right. And so there's a sense in which, and it was called The Gift of the Blessing, and they really unpacked this manner in which, you know, the legacy of parents really trickled down, in a sense. This is why oftentimes, only in America do we ask, when we meet someone new, we ask two questions: what's your name and what do you do? The rest of the world asks the questions: what are your name and who's your father?
Wow. And between me and you, I can't really stand the what do you do? I just feel like it's always, you know, what do you do is more or less, how does it correspond and align with the material world? You have. And I'm just being honest with you, because I just feel like that's where we're at in society.
Well, in a highly industrialized society, we've commoditized ourselves in many ways. But for much of the rest of the world, it's like, what's your name and who's your father is a shorthand for what's your story? What's the legacy? What's this thing you carry around? And so, because I contend, and I don't want to, I want to keep going with what your story is, but what's going through also through my head at the same time is something I've shared with people before, is that I really see three types of stories in the scriptures. I see legacy stories, redemption stories, and tragedy stories. And if you take all those different episodes and you ascribe them a binary category of positive or negative, legacy, a positive legacy that continues in you is a positive examples, positive history that continues in you is a legacy story.
Sure.
Negative episodes that result in you pursuing a positive end is a redemption story. And the one who's pursuing a negative end is a tragedy story, regardless of what they had before. Because there are people who squander positive heritage into a tragedy story, and there's people who never overcome negative past, and that's a tragedy story. But I oftentimes tell people, I say, well, if we go ahead and assume that you're picking, or that you're pursuing a positive end, pursuing Christ, pursuing God's purposes for you, then it falls under either a legacy or a redemption story. And in my reading of the scriptures, it seems as though the redemption stories are the ones that God enjoys most to tell. And so anytime someone's sitting there talking to me about whatever episodes they had up until now, they're like, "You're sick puppy. Why are you developing this smile on your face while I'm telling you all this crap that I went through?" I'm like, "Because you're telling me a redemption story, and that's a story that God loves to tell.
It's testimony. It's testimony."
Yeah.
Well, and I love how you defined all that, and I really think in my life, I think it's a little of both, of legacy,
okay,
and the redemption.
Because there's positive things that you're drawing on.
Oh man, yeah,
yeah.
I'm very much thankful to be able to know deep down in my heart when the Lord has called upon me, as far as we'll just call it good deeds as a Christian. I feel like I've done my best when I've been put in those situations to give back to my community and to ensure that I'm trying to live the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And do I fall short all the time, Father? Don't sit here. I can't walk on water. You can't crucify me. I'm an imperfect, broken human being. But I think that's very important. And I think that one thing I tell my clients, and I wish, and I'm really thankful for this platform right now as a candidate and this opportunity to be on here with you on this podcast. I think that society, if we can all move forward and agree that we're all broken, and that the past, even the brokenness and the darkness in the past, right, the skeletons as they call it in the closet, can actually define us today,
right?
In that redemption access, especially,
right.
and in the legacy access. I think that's a beautiful thing.
The legacy is, I mean, and specifically, sometimes like I've talked with people who say, "Listen, you don't know. I've got this parental example going back that is just really," and they tell me a story that's got me in the fetal position in the corner after a while, but. And they say, "You don't know the parents I had and the experiences I had as a child." And we start trying to walk them through a redemption story and say, "Understand, this is a story that God enjoys telling." But then you start walking through, say, the 10 Commandments, and you get to this commandment: honor your father and mother.
Yep.
And which seems never to offer a caveat as to whether or not your father and mother are honorable. Honor your father and mother if they made it easy on you, and so it's funky because there's no fine print in the Decalogue for that. And so it's something that you go, well, but then God, it seems like that's really hard for me based upon my experiences. And the Holy Spirit seems to go, yeah, I know it's hard for you. Probably not any more impossible. Fortunately, I kind of specialize in those kind of things. And so he enables us to find stuff to honor, even if it's like an archaeological excavation through your past. Yeah. Like, okay, I unearthed some things to to honor about my father and mother in some way, where they're going to participate in my redemption story too.
Wow, that's strong. And I'm trying to, in my mind and in my spirit, I'm just trying to align. Are there experiences that align with what you said? And that's tough for me, because I really, to be honest with myself, it's hard for me to really define any experience that kind of align with that. So that makes it tough. That's where that's how. So that can tell you, that can kind of tell you on a scale what that brokenness looks like for me, within me. But I try not to be critical of others, by no means. And let me tell you why, because I've always shared with community and with people in my office, and I'm going to share this with society. If I'm critical of who I am and my standards and how I think, how I express myself, my actions, my piety, how I use my resources, that's going to have a bigger impact on others to do what's right here on earth, because I feel like society has gotten so, they're pointing the finger, you're the reason, this,
very accusatory,
and we want to be critical of everybody else.
Right.
And correct, just like you stated. And I think that's unhealthy for us as a society. And I think we can all make a large impact here on earth by being critical of who we are, and how we define ourselves on a day-to-day basis with others, and that interaction. And it goes in line with what I told you about, is trying to meet, the standards of the kingdom of heaven that he calls us upon here in the flesh while our feet are on earth,
Yeah.
So
I'm very thankful that that God, for reasons which seem good to Him, allows humans to do this stuff. Because in terms of trying to build, in terms of building, the kingdom of God now, and because we're so imperfect. There's so many different things. People say, well, I confess my sins regularly. I'm like, yeah, but who is self-aware enough to adequately confess the sins that you think that need to be redeemed? Wow. I mean, I'm not that self-aware. I'm sorry, but I confess sins all the time. Do you imagine that? For you to imagine for a second that that's a comprehensive list? And
wow.
But so now that kind of helps a little bit, because we're kind of piecing together the motive for pursuing office, right? And to seeking to, in essence, replace an incumbent with your business savvy, with your experience, with your the instinct that life experience, but also in business and early in life has given you, to provide leadership in ways that you think is not occurring now.
Right. Well, I wanted to touch on my spirit, my competitive spirit as an athlete. A lot of people tell you John Rogers don't like to lose. And I know that in life and in different sports and games, I will lose, and we'll lose with my team.
Right.
But Michael Jordan said something special. I forget, there was another professional basketball player he was talking to after he retired, and they were talking about a game, and he said, well, there is no I in team, but he said there is an I in win.
Right.
So saying, at times when he was selfish, but, they called him Black Jesus. So, I guess only he could get away with that. And to me, and, that debate, and a lot of people want to talk about that GOAT debate, and I know we're getting off the subject, but Michael Jordan to me I would love to shake his hand. Well, I mean, he was one of my greatest idols and still is,
I understand
as far as
that
his competitive spirit,
right? Because I've heard that many times where true competitors are motivated probably not as much by the desire to win, by the absolute hatred of losing.
Right.
In some ways. I think that's a quote from Nick Saban at some point. Saint Saban. Sorry.
Saint Saban. That's right. That's
sorry.
Right. And roll tide there for a second. By the way, Father.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, and let's get back to, I don't want to sound selfish when it comes to what I'm talking about with Michael Jordan. I think what I'm trying to apply this message out to our community and to you and to the voters is that I want to win. If I was to be in that office, I want to win for the people.
Okay.
So we want to ensure that the decisions that we make, these are winning decisions, not decisions where we're going to lose as a community, but where we can win in a sense overall when we look at it.
Okay.
And because at the end of the day, when I look at as a candidate and as a citizen, when I look at government, a lot of people say, "Oh, this is government funded. This is funded by the government."
Right,
and I'm like, "No, it's not. It's taxpayer
by
funded."
My neighbor.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. It's taxpayer funded.
Right.
And I think that public officials need to be mindful of that, and I think what happens is sometimes I think some of these candidates, a lot of these candidates go in with a good heart, but they just come out different. And one of the things that my wife was very much concerned about was that aspect of running, because she knows my heart. She knows I'm a good man. She knows that. And she knows I have a public servant heart to do what's right for the people. But she's also being very, very, very thoughtful and very intelligent and very mindful of politics and what that can look like sometimes.
I know that Dothan is not Washington, but
it is not.
But with regard to Washington, D.C., it was best described by one of the fathers, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who said, "You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy." And so, as an ordained Jedi, I can quote that.
Yeah.
And so, but the point is, but in microcosm, that's a genuine concern, right? That all of a sudden one gets involved in even the local politics process, and it can change you. So that's a genuine fear.
It is. And Father, and let's get to that aspect of what we're talking about now and how it relates to me as a candidate and the concerns of voters, is that you touch on the federal level, it's polarized. I mean, it's very much polarized right now. I mean, a Republican and Democrat especially. I mean, that that is very polarized and very unhealthy.
So to what extent is party affiliation even relevant at this level?
At this level, I think it still is. I think it still has a lot of relevance because we're deep South, you know, as far as being a Christian conservative. And I think just the majority of our community here, you know, my opinion is that certainly the majority of people are affiliated with being Republican.
Right.
And more certainly being a Christian conservative, which I am. I want to stay in the middle of the road because I believe that, you know, at the same time, you know, sometimes I think Republicans can go a little too far right and the Democrats are at times going a little too far left. Right. But me personally, I think the voters need to know that I have a very large moral compass that I work with. Whereas I'm thinking, sometimes I'm really wondering about some of our politicians, but I wanted to go back to first and foremost, when you're talking about the federal level, about it being polarized.
Oh, I have to confess to you, to my in my growing cynicism. I mean, I've succumbed to that in many respects, and I don't really like that. It's something I kind of critique about myself. I don't want to become fully cynical, but you know, right now we're in that season where the campaign ads are running all the time, and you're like, there's just such white noise now because so many different slogans are thrown about, which mean nothing to me anymore. You'll say this, you know, candidate A has these different values, and the bottom it says and a U.S. veteran. Candidate B, all these values and a U.S. veteran. Candidate C, all these different values, U.S. veteran. I'm like, okay, so since they all have that in common, can I swipe that off the table now? Since they cancel each other out?
Yeah.
This I have to give a little bit of pushback. Every candidate calls themselves a public servant. I mean, which candidate do you know has put out a television commercial says, you know, I'm just a run-of-the-mill politician who will sell his mom to get the vote on my favorite thing. No one says that. They all have the same rhetoric. They all have the same slogans, all the same things that fit on a bumper sticker. Yeah. So you got to try to drill down under those in a sense.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think what most voters are trying to figure out is there a difference between a public servant and a politician? And I'm going to tell you that there is. And I would think to believe, I know for a fact I can define a public servant. And a public servant is going to be someone, first and foremost, that's got a foundation of faith.
Okay.
Secondly, they got a foundation of...
So which the incumbent has stated as well.
Right, and that's a good positive thing.
So let's take that off the table.
Yeah, well,
because they cancel each other out.
Sure, okay. And the other is that a public servant is not looking and or seeking to establish political relationships that would in turn turn them to being more political. Because when I look at the political aspect of office and what a politician may look like, it's somebody that's shaking a lot of hands behind closed doors. And these ultimately are the ones that are supporting the campaign.
Okay, interesting.
That a lot of citizens don't see behind the scenes.
Okay.
So a lot of that is the financial aspect of contributions, monetary forms.
Well, you and I met the other day over at the dedication for the farm center.
That's correct. And Father, let's keep in mind that was divine. And let's keep in mind, too, that my spirit was very unsettling whenever I was approaching
you mentioned
event.
that.
And I'm being totally honest.
Well, you mentioned that. I really want to unpack that because what does that mean when someone, I mean, what does that mean to say that? Again, it's a little jargon laden. And
when I say that, and for me, and I'm just going to be honest with myself about that because I can never deceive myself and cut myself short. When I say it was unsettling to my spirit. Okay. There's that internal, maybe that internal moral compass, that internal spirit that's just like, you don't want to be here long. And I feel like it was a very, very, very political environment. It just really was.
Right.
And I know that I just don't really want to be heavily involved with that because I want to serve the people. I want to serve the community.
Right.
That's what's first and foremost to me. And I really feel like when you get heavily involved in politics and the political relationships and the establishment, as they call it. And I know you may say, well, John, you have to define that for me as well.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm being honest. And I know that, I know you're a very intelligent man.
I have an academic baggage also.
Yeah.
So sorry about that.
So that being said, I just felt like I was a little unsettling, and it was very divine in the fact that I was very far off. You notice I was standing far off.
Right.
And I really want to be there to support the community and see the farm center as well, because from what I understood, I think it was about $6.2 million in taxpayer money. I believe that's correct. That's what I overheard.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a fact or not. I have no idea. It'd be nice if we could have some transparency to know these type things. Maybe if the commission and the chairman should have announced how much of taxpayers' money was actually involved in that when we actually were out there. Because I think that transparency is important to our community. And I think there's a lot of citizens that want to know that, because at the end of the day, if there was $6.2 million of taxpayer money, then what's the next step?
Isn't that document available, like on some source or some open source?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think there are some sources. I'm not sure, Father. I think that's a great question, and maybe we should encourage some citizens to go see if there are.
Okay.
And maybe they are. So I'm not going to sit here and say that they're not. Okay. I don't know.
It's probably like in the county commission records or something like that. Except if it was voted on at some point in the past.
Well, let's get the specifics about what we observed out there.
Okay.
So one of the commissioners talked about in 1959. That's when the farm center was built. Well, guess what? It was built, and he said, I believe he said $158,000. Do you recall?
Oh, it was just some insanely less amount.
Yeah. And back in 1959.
Right.
So we're willing to talk about how much the costs were in 1959.
Right.
But we didn't say about what were the costs in the renovations. You get where I'm going?
Well, I mean,
I just think that
to what extent there's an extent
we're transparent about 1959 costs, but we didn't say a word out there that day about how much was invested in it for renovations.
I don't think anyone would expect that something like that would be done now, because based upon the cost of labor and the various different contracts.
Sure, we know it was going to be a lot higher.
Exactly,
than 158,000. I mean, 1959 is a long time ago.
I imagine that's just a homework assignment in terms of looking through the county commission records. I mean, whenever I show up there, there's like this agenda and voting on X many thing that costs this much.
Sure.
So, but
me as a citizen, and you got to understand, though, I'm only speaking for myself as a citizen, as that being a key of importance to me. It may not be for somebody else, but I just think it's. And from what I'm hearing from the community, a lot of everything I'm hearing is that the community wants to see transparency. Right. I even talked to a great friend of mine who's a farmer, and the day prior to seeing him, I talked to another candidate that's running for office who was giving me a history lesson about the Willoughbys, who were farmers down deep in Columbia and Gordon back in the 1900s. And I remember when he told me the last name, I said, well, I went to school with one of the Willoughbys, and his name was Colby. The next day, I'm at the Houston County Administrative Building right before I'm entering in, because I was going to go in and introduce myself to Mr. Patrick Davenport that day. I see him. He says, John Rogers. I said, Colby. I said, how in the world? The next day we were talking about your family and farming. He said, yeah, we go back to the 1900s.
Wow.
His name's Colby Willoughby, and he's a farmer. And you know what he told me, Father? He says, John, I'm supporting you. But the one thing, if the people elect you in that office, can you please be transparent with us? Can the commission, can you bring some leadership to have some more transparency? So that's been expressed from the community.
Yeah, that's true. No, I would definitely see how that there's value there, because everyone's tired of something where if it's done using a lot of taxpayer dollars, and then someone wants it to be unpacked and what how it was done and what was the contracts of that. It almost becomes like a medical bill. It's so itemized, and you get lost in the paperwork of it. Then everyone just says, oh, whatever.
I can see that. Father, that's a great.
And so
great evaluation of putting that.
Well, and that's something that definitely people want to know, because I mean, you want to be able to know it to the extent that you're involved in your government. You want to know that your money's being used properly, that it's being used responsibly, that there's some sort of negotiation going on. there's always this concern that if you can get a government contract, whether it's local or national or whatever, that's going to be a sweet spot because no one ever asks how much they're spending on that.
You're right.
And that's something that I think everyone is tired of. Was it merely that, or was there more? Was the discomfort more of the sense of in settings like that where it seems like everybody's there to kind of show face in a political setting? It doesn't lend itself over to really authentic interaction.
Father, I don't know if I can answer that one. It's a very complex question, you know. Like I said, I was unsettled.
I've been in a lot of those scenarios where you're shaking hands with people, you're going,
well,
like this.
Right. Well, I just tell you, I tell you what, I know it was divine for me to look to, once I got closer, I looked to my right and I see you. You know, I'm Kathleen. I'm thinking, Father? Well, I've never seen, well, you know, where you been? I go to St. Columbia. You ain't, and then
right.
You introduce yourself to me and I introduced myself to you and I thought it was divine. And then whenever you gave me the opportunity, I mean, obviously you had the incumbent on here, who I have great respect for. Me as a human being, I tell people he's not my opponent. You know, he's the one that has the job, and so he's just doing the best job on running on his record.
Okay,
and I think that's very important for the incumbent to do, and especially because he's run a clean campaign, and I've been very much thankful for that. This is my first rodeo, and I never want to run anything a dirty campaign.
That's so wonderful. It's great to hear because, again, one of the ways in which Christians sour on politics, in a sense, is that every election season, it seems as though to differentiate themselves from their various different candidates, especially primary season, it seems as though that commandment that you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor is the first that gets tossed. Because everyone just understands that this is a smash mouth business and people are going to get bloodied. But then when they're done, they're going to shake hands and say, okay, let's try to make it work. I cannot imagine going to Congress in a room full of 400 some odd former student body presidents, trying to make nice with a person that was lying about you just mere weeks ago. And so that's the thing. So it's very refreshing to see for someone.
Thank you for saying that.
If it's very refreshing to see, it's like, oh, no, pursuing an office based upon either a disagreement of policy and philosophy, or an agreement with it, but believing that there's a more effective method, a more effective personality mix. Right. You come with a different set of tools to accomplish the same things.
Amen.
So
I like the way you said that. I mean, that's a great way of putting it.
So I think that helps people kind of. I know for me, I don't think I'm the only one, but I know for me, you tire of holding your nose to the ballot box, hoping that you're just picking the lesser of two evils. And you would really, there's a cynicism coming out.
Sure.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and when you have the ballot, I mean, obviously there's names on it. And I think I want to make sure that the community knows as a candidate, one of the major reasons why I made the decision when I felt like the Lord was tugging on my heart was because I felt like it was unhealthy for our community, unhealthy for our democracy to see a lot of these public offices where the incumbents are going unopposed, Father. I just don't think it's healthy.
Right.
Because it gives them a pass for the next 4 years. They just walk in. They don't campaign. What, you get me? And I had a problem with it, and I was bickering about it. So a lot of my friends that are my support systems here in the community said, "Well, if there's somebody to do something about it, it's John Rogers, because we know what you stand for, and you're naturally just a great human being, good heart. Your faith is strong. You're a pillar in your community. So why don't you do something?" I'm thinking, I am bickering about it. So I prayed about it, and it was like, the Lord was like, you know what? You can make a difference. Win, lose, or draw. You will have an impact on your community, and you will have a platform as well, Mr. Rogers. So guess what? I do. I have a platform right now with you, Father, to get a strong message out about who I am and the love I have for my community and for our people, and what community really needs to look like when it's a sense of unification. Right, and love, and supporting one another.
Mm.
And it goes back to why I think it's extremely important for Brandon and I to run a clean campaign for our community.
Right.
Because it's healthy for everybody.
It really is.
You know, that's something good that people can talk about and say, well, I'll tell you what, that Brandon John Rogers, those are two viable candidates. This is going to be tough. Because Brandon, as a person, I have a lot of respect for him.
Right.
I told somebody that even if he hands me my butt in this election and the people decide that it's Brandon for the position, right, and that's the people's decision, that he knows, and hopefully he'll hear this, that I'm going to take him to dinner, and I'm going to take him for steak, and I'm going to shake his hand because I want him to know who I am as a person, that I can still be his friend, that this is never, and I think that it needs to also, with my platform and my opportunity right now, to set the mindset and to set the foundations for the rest of our communities all around, even at the local level, at the state level, and the federal level, that campaigns, we need to get back to campaigning like this, Father.
Right. Yeah. Well, I fortunately, I don't know what is fortunate or not, but it does make the choice more difficult for the voter, because I often say that the more difficult choices are not between good and bad, but between good and best.
Right. Okay.
And
I like that.
And so therefore a person really has to think it through and not just default to good and bad guys. And so it's better to have two really good, viable people who they can look at and say, based upon the merits and the experiences and the skill sets of both, they feel like they can make their choice based upon what they think is going to be the better outcome, rather than just, something black and white.
Right. Well, Father, and I think there's a perception in the community when it comes to public office and candidates and politics, as we put it, that they're wondering, when they're doing an evaluation on a candidate, they're wondering, okay, what is this candidate really looking for as far as a benefit to them in public office? It's got to that point because they really want to know what's the benefit to them as a candidate, where we're going to serve them in the decision it makes that has a positive impact on their lives, as far as the way the government is running and things of that nature. So I think it's very important that, for me, that my message to our community and to our voters, that they understand that when they see that name on the ballot, unfortunately, it has to say my name.
Right.
But the name, they need to define the name. What does the name stand for when it comes to them as the voter? And for me, I can sincerely tell them that my name stands for the Houston County people. It's about the majority. It's about our community. And it's about real leadership, real transparent leadership, integrity, someone that has self-respect, someone that's been battle tested as well, that's actually had to negotiate contracts, had to look at overhead, has to look at numbers, and to bring real leadership to the commission so that we can really run a government that's transparent, efficient, and effective. And that's what this is all about. And so what the citizens have to do, they have to do an evaluation on the candidates. But the incumbent is a little different. Every question that I answer as a candidate, for me, is going to be answered more in the private sector to how I would like for it to align to when I apply to government, because I've never been in public office. He, the incumbent, I think has at least 12 years of experience.
But
so from him, he has to run a little more on the record. So I think a little bit of what citizens and voters need to look at is that's correct. He actually has a record.
Well, it's still
he's got to talk about that.
Well, then it falls to you then to have been such a student of that record that we can talk about. Maybe, I know you don't have all the time in the world. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
You're okay.
But it then behooves us to talk about, or maybe just a couple of examples where decisions were made by the incumbent that you would have sought a different outcome.
Well, I think one of the biggest ones would have been the farm center.
Okay.
Not knowing what the real number is that was invested in that, I look at it, if we're making that type of investment, is there going to be a return on investment for our citizens?
Right.
And I know that they're looking to use that for events and venues and things of that nature. So I'm going to look at that as a decision on I think at some point in time they could have sold that place to the city of Dothan, and I think that would have been a great decision because I think there was a bigger benefit to the taxpayers to sell it, and maybe there was a viable option to make a taxpayer investment in it.
Okay,
but I just feel like the one that was made, I disagree with it, and that's one. I believe that. I disagree with a lot of the parks and recreation aspect of leadership with the commission as well. I know that the Chattahoochee State Park has been a big one, especially for that district. I believe it's District 2. Unfortunately, I don't know all the facts neither. You get me? And the circumstances that surrounded their decisions as well. So I have to be mindful of that as well, Father, when I give you my perspective.
Understood.
In all fairness to them.
Because
I don't. I'm not as informed as they're in office. They get their information. They digest this. They do the research. And hopefully they're doing their due diligence as well when they do that.
Yes.
But when it comes to the state park, I know they never renewed the lease. I know a lot of people were very unhappy with that. That run real deep in that district too. And unfortunately, I just think that that's something that doesn't even need to be discussed at this point in time because they never renewed the lease.
Understood.
And I believe there was an article in reference to that state park that come from the Reverend Ricky Plummer in reference to that part. So I know it was a big issue. But I also want to say in Reverend Plummer's defense, that's got to be hard for him to. It shouldn't be hard for him to put out an article just because he's a pastor to a local big church here. Because, at the end of the day, Father, he's just like you. He's a citizen as well, a normal citizen. And I think at what point in time can he not be involved in democracy and have his perspective? So I kind of feel bad for him at times hearing about what was going on with all that. And, how that all ended in reference to that article. I was a little disappointed the way that ended because I heard that, they kind of went into private closed door session.
Oh, goodness.
And then posts were deleted. So that was a little unhealthy to hear from me. That's just my opinion. Other people may, this is my opinion. But yeah, so when we look at decisions that the commission has made, past and the present, there's several that they've made.
I like to, if I can,
I'd like to get on talk about back in the 1920s and 1930s. They were called road commissioners. They had just a major responsibility to take care of the roads. And I think that has been very much neglected. So those are other things. Because I think sometimes it's just citizens want the basics and what government's supposed to provide. Sometimes they just want a nice roadway to go down. So the county roads are nice, and that we're taking care of the ditches. We're looking for long-term solutions instead of short-term solutions, and I really disagree, and I really feel like a lot of the decisions, going back to your question, a lot of the decisions that have been made by the commission have been short-term decisions. And so all you're really doing is the fire, you get me, you're putting a little bit of water on there, but the embers are still hot. And then it flares back up. And so I told somebody one time, it's like, well, John, what do you really do? I said, man, I'm just putting out fires everywhere. And sometimes the bonfire comes, and you better have the helicopter. You better have some helicopters to dump the water on that, and you got to put it completely out. So I've been a big time problem solver. When there's been a problem, I come up with a resolution, and I know I have the established relationships with people to put a team together. To get the right resolution to put the fire completely out.
Absolutely.
To where it never flares back up. And there's been a long-term solution as well.
Absolutely.
So that's important too, is the way it applies to government, the way it needs to run, Father. So that's why I disagree with a lot. I think a lot of decisions they've made have also been made on short-term aspects instead of long-term. But in the defense to the commission, there could be some financials that go along with it to where they had to make short-term decisions in their defense. So I'm not a lopsided, one-sided coin person. I'm willing to say there's two sides to that coin, Father. So I'm fair and I'm very fair and just when it comes to that. And I think that's very important for our citizens to know as well, that I negotiate to be fair and just to both sides.
Well, and that's part of why I just don't feel like it's my role to be, ornery
Yeah.
about with regard to. But I do have a kind of an obsession with kind of moving away the overburden. This is my terms I learned from my dad, who was a gold panning, kind of moving away the overburden to get down to the nuggets at the bottom. And oftentimes campaigns are given on family values. Well, the opponent has family values. Oftentimes someone's a veteran. Well, the other person's a veteran. One says integrity. Well, are we saying that the other one doesn't have integrity? What's that? All those things, which possibly are all potentially also true of the opponent. Let's take them all off the table and just deal with specific areas of either disagreement or effectiveness.
Yeah.
And though that's where I kind of want to drill down.
Sure.
Because those are the things that a conscientious voter feels as though they are getting differently with candidate A than candidate B. Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate you giving those examples of, like, for example, the financial transparency related to the farm center. That gives an opportunity to kind of think about what's its fiscal benefit to the community, and might it have been more advantageous to sell it? That's a genuine question related to that. I very much hear what you're saying about roads, because I know that for myself, I've been in and around as a chaplain for fire departments for 17 years.
Oh, wow.
And so I've ridden with a lot of every department I've been at, East Texas, Houston, Central Florida. I've ridden with a lot of them, a lot of their calls, and I see that oftentimes it seems a very inglorious and unspectacular miracle unfolding. But when the road is smooth, the EMT can get the paramedic can get an IV and stabilize a patient on the way to the hospital.
Amen.
And so somewhere deep in the bowels of a county seat, there's someone who signed a paper to get that road paved well, that is answering someone's prayer at that moment of crisis. And so I very much am passionate about exactly those type of mundane things you're talking about.
Amen.
But that's why I want to get down to the nitty gritty in terms of decisions that are made that one decision is made a different way. You thought, like, no, it would have been more advantageous to take.
And I like where you're going, talking about EMS and that aspect of it. I overheard. I don't know if this is fact, but I just overheard that I believe the EMS was being addressed because they've really been hurting. Volunteer fire departments, especially in the rural areas, have been really hurt, and they really feel like they haven't received the resources that they need to offer fire coverage to our community, and that's very important. So I think government has a responsibility for that, and government has that same responsibility that you just gave me a prime example of. And I think at some point in time there was some issues with one of the rural areas as far as EMS, and that there was something stated that they didn't feel like government had the responsibility of getting involved in that. And I very much disagree with that if that was said. Yes, they really do. They do. And that's why you need to really think about real leadership and EMS and volunteer fire department and what that really consists of when it comes to public safety and things that nature and law enforcement. We really got to make sure that's funded. I mean, that's a benefit to the people. So at the end of the day, for me, as a candidate, I really think it's very important that our citizens realize that me as a candidate, when I define government, that we need to understand that government has a responsibility to provide services back to the citizen that's actually the one, in a sense, the taxpayer. You know what I mean? Actually, one of the ones donating to what's actually making government, run.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Right.
That's the revenue. We're the revenue, in a sense. We are. So when that revenue is generated and you look at it, we need to make sure that citizens are really having a benefit from government. And I'll tell you another thing, Father, and I want to make sure, another thing I disagree with that the commission took away was driveways. They took the driveways away in the county. So when somebody buys a piece of property, they used to, whenever I bought a piece of property, if I bought 2 acres off a county road, I called the county, I buy my pipe, but they would come in and install the driveway. So all I was really out was the pipe, but they come and installed all the dirt, the rocks, and they pretty much established a driveway, which I think is a great thing for economic development. And I think that the county does have that responsibility to do that, and they removed that.
Interesting.
So
wow.
I don't know what the costs look like on an annual basis to install that, but I think I've heard a lot of citizens talk about wanting to see that come back, and I'm for that and bringing that back, because at the end of the day, when somebody buys a piece of property, if it's in the county, they're now that property, there's property taxes, right? And if they build a house, they bring a family in, that stimulates growth in our economy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And we need to be thinking as public servants in representing our voters in our communities. We really need to be making sure that our decisions and our practices are totally aligned with, bringing and promoting family, growth as far as blue collar and white collar to Houston County, so that we can continue all to come together to stimulate our economy in a positive way. Because we can all prosper with an economy that's really strong.
Right.
You understand?
Absolutely.
So there also needs to be decisions that correspond with stimulation of economy.
Well, you also you're making economic decisions, and it's not always obvious with regard to those. It's not always obvious what the best course of action is.
Right.
I just was reading articles recently about a town in Missouri. It was an interesting article about the town in Missouri that basically had voted out half of their city council because of how they had approved the construction of a data center within their rural community. And they all perceived, and this goes to how people think AI, what's its role in society, what's its economic impact. Their perception was that this is an AI data center, and AI is in a progressively inhuman fashion taking away so many jobs that humans used to do, that they didn't want anything about that in their community. And some would argue, well, but there's possible economic advantages to the revenue stream and the taxes that will come from that. But the citizens all decided, but we're making a choice that we're maintaining a pro-human economy in this regard. And they very much reacted to that. And so those are some times where, I think we even have a data center that's going in nearby ourselves. And so those are larger societal questions that people have local questions about.
Sure.
And that
how it has an
that will have an impact on local economies, local decisions.
Well, and I think the ones that are in public office have a responsibility and duty to be totally transparent with our citizens about that impact. I think you would agree with that. Yeah. And I think Brandon did, the incumbent Brandon did, he touched on in the Rehoboth, when we were in Rehoboth, he touched on wanting to see possibly having a data center in the future. And I really haven't looked at that and what that impact really is economically and on jobs. Will it reduce jobs and what that really looks like? So I really haven't done any homework. I know for a fact, me being honest, I'm heavily invested in artificial intelligence and I have been.
Get out to my office.
I know this is not good, but being totally transparent with the voters out there and transparent with myself, because that's first and foremost. I can't deceive myself.
Understood.
So I'm heavily invested for the last 5 years, and to be honest, I have done amazing with that, and I'm still holding because I see where we're going. And anybody that has any common sense, technology has just, look what it's doing. And I just, it's sad to say, but there's positive impacts and there's some very negative impacts to it. And it's just the God honest truth.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think if any quality human being that's in a position of public office,
you have to navigate these things.
Has to navigate.
You can't be ignorant of them.
Yeah, and I think that they have to do their due diligence.
Right.
And I think they need to be transparent.
Right.
And sometimes you may have to give it to the people to vote on. And Father, I think referendums are very important. And I think that's another part that I think is important with real leadership, that there may be some that I really feel like there's decisions that the people need to make when it comes to our commission and retirement. Because after a commissioner is in office after 10 years, they get retirement. And we know that some people are really opposed to, seeing public servants or politicians sit in office for 12, 16 years, 22 years for long terms. That's what, a lot of people are calling for, Congress and House saying, hey, let's have some term limits, basically, Father, so we can have, give us 8 years out of there.
The concept of the citizen statesman is such an antiquated artifact that it requires my expertise as an archaeologist to pull it out. Because, no one assumes that everyone's just going to serve a 2, 4, 6 year term anymore and then leave. No one assumes that. And so the beast will eat you, and we all get to kind of watch that downfall. And so, again, God, please help me with my cynicism. I'm really trying to work on that. It's just,
I think you're being honest with yourself.
Oh my gosh.
Your perspective. And I think we don't want anybody cutting themselves short and deceiving themselves.
Well,
then we're deceiving everybody in the room. And that's a standard that I live by. And I tell my kids all the time is that once you start deceiving yourself, you're deceiving everybody else in the room.
Oh my gosh.
And and we did, and it does happen. We know that, but I think you're right on. And even though I've made a decision to run for public office, and sometimes, that truth hurts in a sense when I'm hearing it from you, but it is, and that's the concern. It's not your intent, but it's a real concern that my wife actually had when I made that decision.
Well, I have 2 hot button issues. I hope you don't mind. Yeah, I invited you in here. Basically, went through this whole rigmarole just to talk about what's important to me.
Okay,
because it's all about me. As the great prophet Carly Simon said, "You're so vain, you probably think this conversation's about you." But for me, my 2 hot button issues are the fact that our sheriff is elected, but our sheriff's office is funded by the county. And so the Houston County Sheriff is elected by the people, but the sheriff's office, law enforcement, is funded by the county. And you set that budget, and how they're supported.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
And then we pass the budget along to him.
Exactly right.
And then he kind of uses it. I've really been very supportive of our sheriff. I mean, I really have. And I have heard from the community loud and clear that I believe the budget that he's received, he's always given back to the commission, which is always a good thing. I've even heard even close to $250,000 has been given back to the commission. Now, what they do with the, that portion of the budget he did not use for whatever, I don't even know if it's annual or what it is. If it's biannual, I have no idea. But so
that's wonderful.
With that hot button issue though, what is the main thing? Are you is the issue that the commission is the one that actually has to, in a sense, approve the budget for the sheriff?
Right.
So you feel like the sheriff should
no. I'm just
have a little more authority.
No. I don't. I'm not. It's not a hot button issue in terms of asking for change. I've just always like to bring it up to see where a person lands in terms of how zealous they are for the support of our law enforcement.
Oh wow! Now, so when you say it, law enforcement, I think is so important. I think that I
have friends that disagree with me on that. They see, there's that libertarian side that's like, law enforcement, my rights. I'm like, yeah, but I've ridden with a lot of officers and see how God, when you take that beatitude of blessed are the peacemakers and you make a whole career out of that, I've witnessed that take place. And so I'm very much, I like hearing what a candidate's view in terms of supporting of their law enforcement.
Correct.
Insofar as it falls to you to do it.
Full support. I'm an accountability person.
Right.
I Father, I hold myself accountable. Yeah. I have a sense of accountability, a sense of responsibility, whereas I really feel like it's starting to diminish amongst society. So when it comes to law enforcement, protect and serve and what that duty and responsibility, I have nothing but the utmost respect for law enforcement. Yeah. And obviously people, libertarians and other people will say, well, what about the dirty ones, right? Well, guess what? This is the real world. That's it, it just,
find me on the wrong day. And you'll like,
Amen.
What about the
Father,
honorary priests? And so
thank you. And you can find John Rogers that same way. I could have a bad day. And
I know, right?
But when it comes to law enforcement, I think that, they're going to have my utmost support for law enforcement and what they do. And obviously, I may have to tell our leadership when it comes to our sheriff, hey, we may have to start. I'm getting tired of seeing all the littering, Father. I see a gentleman off of Saunders Road. Right. Most every morning when I do hit that road, there is a citizen who lives in a house off of Saunders. He's out there with a bag picking up trash off the right of way. I'm behind people all the time and they're chunking their trash. All they got to do, we got to have a little more self-respect and keep our communities clean. And Father, we see the signs that say $500 fine. And we may have a conversation. And I think most importantly that the chair and the commission need to obviously support our local sheriff in hearing out. When he should be able to have the floor to present to us what those needs are to ensure that we meet the needs to support law enforcement to keep our communities safe, Father.
Well, that's comforting in and of itself, because when you say that the sheriff presents their budget to the commission, and then your instinct would say, I don't see any reason to construct this at all. Do you have everything you need? That's a very comforting thing. The other subject that's near and dear to me, and again, I don't want to take too much of your time about this. I know you've been very generous with your time. You've been very generous with your time, but the relationship that our local volunteer fire departments that all outline DFD's area of coverage.
Yeah.
What's the county's role in seeing them equipped and supported?
Yeah, so I believe there's 17 in the Volunteer Fire Department Association. I believe Jason Renault is the president, and I've had some conversations with him. I actually donated $500 from Judicial Case Management, made a contribution to help them, support them financially. I know it's not a lot, but does
the county commission have a role in seeing them supported?
Me personally, yes. I feel like they do. Now, are they? That's a big question. Okay. I really feel like they haven't.
Okay.
I really feel like they have not supported it. And it kind of goes, we had some conversation earlier that kind of lines with what I brought up to you. I really feel like they do have a role.
Okay.
And especially when it comes to public safety and fire coverage. And they really are underfunded. Now, the problem is that I agree with our incumbent that sometimes the financials have went their way and it was squandered. So
some accountability may be necessary.
The incumbent has talked about that, and I agree with the incumbent. There needs to be accountability. So that does, whoever the next ones to come into this next commission need to address that for our community. Okay. One, we should support our Volunteer Fire Department Association and ensure that they have the resources that they need.
Okay.
Period. Number two, once they are funded, if they are funded financially from taxpayer money from the commission, then we need to ensure that there are stringent financial, audits in place to ensure that the money and the resources are being used for what they're supposed to be used for when it comes to the volunteer fire department. That's where I stand on that hot button issue.
Thank you. You've been very generous with your time. I appreciate you having this conversation with me. And again, I apologize if it seemed like I'm kind of going too academic and trying to unpack things, but that's the service I try to provide to people, to the few people that this will reach, and hopefully this is some benefit to you, and share it with whoever you want to. But I feel like the service I provide is to kind of let's talk a little bit about beyond what you would see on a billboard or on I see your signs along the road. Doesn't tell me much. And so I feel like I just want to tease out some of those things. It's really, really helpful.
Well, Father, going back to what you're talking about, the slogans and saying, well, this guy, I think there's three, I got two different ones, but one of the most important ones to me that really, for the community to know about it says politics last. Because the politics aspect of it means I'm not shaking hands with people behind closed doors, making decisions and saying, hey, I'm going to look out when there's a vote. I need to look out for your best interest because it'll have an impact on you or your business. So we have to remove that. So that's why I say politics last. Protecting taxpayers means we're being transparent with them so that they know that they're getting a benefit from their taxpayer money. That they're benefiting from on the roadways, that they see it, the parks, things of that nature. And parks are not going to generate revenue. That's not what they're made to. But there's another aspect to enjoying families going out there and enjoying a park and the natural aspect of what we receive in that sense of tranquility.
Of course.
Okay. And then it said results first, because I believe that in the success I have, I believe in results. And I believe that behind the results, there has to be a work ethic.
Yes.
And I don't think you can ever have any results without a hard work ethic. And I certainly wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for my work ethic. And the other aspect is, like you talked about, the John Rogers thing. I never wanted to run to see my name on all these signs. I'm getting tired of hearing about John Rogers. You hear me? Because he's broken, right? He's broken. But when I define it in a sense of what it stands for politically as far as a public servant, it stands for running for our community and do what's best for our community.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that people can have integrity in knowing that I'm running for the right reasons, and I'm also going to lead with my heart, and also use the platform as a real leadership to really reflect to a community of how we come together, and how I can have an impact too on our youth, Father, moving forward. Because we really hadn't touched on the youth.
Oh, goodness.
And all that I volunteered
I imagine
for the
we
youth.
can go on for quite some time.
And you're going to have me back.
Because
I've actually enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed this, and I know for a fact everything was divine for me to stand right next to you and to look to my right, especially when I was unsettled, to know I was comforted when I see you.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you talking to
you.
me. The goal was for me just to kind of like move past some of the things. And, and I wanted to hear how you describe yourself, but as a service to voters, and again, I don't know how many voters will hear this, but as a service to anyone who listens, I wanted to separate those things that you say about yourself and kind of like how much of those are the electoral opponents say about, how many of those are identical to what the electoral opponent would say about themselves, and kind of like move those off the table to talk about differences of experience, skill sets, and decision making.
Sure.
And what might that look like? And I feel like we got to the bottom of some of those, and I really appreciate it.
I hope so for you and the community as far as the voters. I think that's very important.
Right.
I think it's very important. The more interviews like this with candidates, I think it's healthier for us as a community. So I think I'm very, very honored to have the opportunity to get that opportunity to express who I am, so that the voter can make a better decision when they get to the ballot box.
Well, thank you for talking to me.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure.